Recording now, this is lesson 6.4 on connecting fractions, decimals, and percents. Before watching the recording, please make sure you have a graph sheet of paper, as well as a pencil, a different colored pen, and a straight edge or ruler. You will need to jot things down as they come up in the video, so you'll be making notes. If you need to pause the video to grab those things, and as well to copy everything down on the page as you see here on the screen, please feel free to do so. Make sure you record today's date as well as the title, and then what you want is a 3x3 chart. On the left hand side is percent, the middle is fraction, and the right hand side is decimal. Now I'm going to continue, so again, if you need to pause it, please do that now. So what we're going to work with in the chart here are equivalent forms. So suppose I gave you in the first row the percent that you're going to work with is 5%. Okay? Now, if you want to pause the recording now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to figure out what the equivalent fraction is of 5% and what the equivalent decimal is of 5%. Okay? I'm just going to continue. In the next row, what I'd like you to figure out is this. Now suppose the fraction I gave you to work with this time instead is 18/20. So again, if you want to pause the recording, figure out what is the corresponding equivalent percent of 18/20 and what is the corresponding equivalent decimal of 18/20. Keep watching the recording if you're not sure how to do this, and I'll explain it in a bit. Finally, in the last row, I'd like you to write down as a decimal 6/10 or 60/100. I'm treating it as the same thing right now here. So again, if you want to pause the recording, figure out what the corresponding equivalent fraction and percent is to 6/10 or 60/100. Do that now. I'm going to continue to explain how you find the equivalent forms. Now, in the first row, I said you have 5%. So 5%, what you want to find is the equivalent fraction. Now, the definition of percent, and what you can jot down in brackets here, it actually means per 100. What that means is it's actually a ratio out of 100. So we know that as a fraction, it actually makes it easier to convert it to a fraction. We know that 5% is automatically going to be a fraction over 100, so that makes it 5/100. Okay? That actually makes the decimal also easy to figure out. Be careful not to make the mistake that it's 5/10. It is not 5/10. That is actually equivalent to 50%. The decimal, if you think about it as 5/100, or sorry, 5/100, it becomes 5/100. Okay? Now for the next row, this time our fraction is not over 100. We have 18/20. We want to figure out the corresponding percent and the decimal. So how do we do this? Well, 20 is actually a nice number to work with because we could easily convert that to a fraction over 100. So what we have to figure out is how many times does 20 go into 100? Well, I know 20 times 5 equals 100, so whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the numerator. So 18 times 5, as a result, becomes 90. So we know that the corresponding fraction, or sorry, the equivalent fraction of 18/20 is 90/100. That makes our percent easy because it's 90%. It's already over 100, so it's per 100. The decimal, again, it can be, that makes it easy too, so it's 9/10 or 90/100. Okay? Now, if you need review with decimals, I suggest you go back to Unit 2 as well, so that you're familiar with the terminology. Finally, in the last row, we have 6/10 or 60/100. Okay, so our fraction and percent are actually easy to figure out too. Our corresponding fraction, again, it's easily over 100. We know that it cannot be 6/100 because the other option is we have 60/100. So it has to be 60/100. Okay? I will convert this to lowest terms in a second. We know that 60/100 is equivalent to 60%. Okay? Now if we reduce this lowest terms, I figure out what is the biggest number that we can divide the numerator and denominator by. Well, if I think I could probably go by divide the numerator and denominator by 20. 60 divided by 20 is 3. And 100 divided by 20 is 5. So the lowest terms of the fraction would be 3 over 5. Okay, so now we've dealt with equivalent forms in this chart. Please make sure you familiarize yourself with being able to move from percent to fraction to decimal, fraction to percent, fraction to decimal, decimal to percent, etc. I'm going to move on and review a concept called benchmark percents. So I'm just going to extend the page here, and my subtitle will be benchmark percents. What do I mean by benchmark percents? These are percents that can help you figure out how to estimate a percent that a fraction would be closest to. Also, too, in real life, these benchmark percents are important for estimating, especially when you're trying to figure out the discount, you're trying to figure out how much you're saving, what percent something is of a number. So what I'd like you to do is copy down this number line here. Okay, so the far end here we have, okay, so at the far end of our number line, what we have here is 0. Actually, what we have is 0%. The far end here we have 100%. Now, 0% doesn't correspond to a fraction, it's just 0 up here. 100% would be 1 whole, so we just put 1 there. Let's mark approximately halfway. I think halfway for me would be about here. Okay, so here, halfway, what's halfway between 0% and 100%? You should know this, it's 50%. Now ask yourself, what is the corresponding fraction to 50%, or what's its equivalent? You should have identified it's 1/2. Okay, let's further subdivide these halves here. Let's see, my halfway point is about here, I think. And my other halfway point is about here, approximately. Okay, now here, but halfway between 0% and 50%, we have 25%. In your head, think about what the equivalent fraction to that would be in lowest terms. In this case, it would be 1/4. Okay? And then here, 50% and 100%, what's halfway between those two? We would have 75%. What is the corresponding fraction, or sorry, equivalent fraction to 75% in lowest terms? It would be 3/4. So, in terms of questions you have to deal with in terms of benchmark percents, here's an example. So suppose I asked you which percent is closest to, say if I gave you question A, 7/10. Question B, I said 3/5. And then let's extend the page here. Or actually, I'll just do it up here. Question, well actually let's just leave it at A and B for now. Now, how can we use our benchmark percents? Well, we know that 7/10, if we convert it to a fraction over 100, we'll easily come up with the equivalent percent. We know 10 times 10 equals 100. 7 times 10 is 70/100. So the actual percent is 70%. In your head, you should be able to figure out 7/10 is 70%. So therefore, it's closest to, according to our benchmark percents, 7/10 is closest to 75% in terms of our benchmark percents, okay? Same thing with 3/5. We can do the same process. 3/5 is not over 100, but we can figure out what it is over 100. So we know that 5 times 20 equals 100. 3 times 20 equals 60. So we know it's 60% Okay, and which fraction, which percent would it be closest to? Well, it's 10 away from 50, and it's 15 away from 75, so therefore 3 over 5 is closest to, in terms of our benchmark percent, 50%. You should even be able to tell as well by looking at the fraction over 5. We know 3 over 5 is over 2.5, right? So we know that it's going to be close to 60% in terms of our estimate. So it's going to be closest to 50% if we're looking at our benchmark percents. Okay, again, something like 7 over 10 or any fraction over 10, you should be able to tell what the corresponding percent is. So your benchmark percents can actually help you figure out and estimate which percent fractions can be closest to. And that's it.